So again, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Mari Brown. I'm from Ask Resource Center, and I will be hosting this webinar. Just want to introduce to you all, if you don't already know, Suzie Paulson. Suzie Paulson has worked for Iowa Voc Rehab Services and has worked as a Social Security benefits planner under the Iowa Work Incentives Planning and Assistance Grant from 2006 until 2012. She has her master's degree from Drake University in rehabilitation and mental health counseling, and is a certified rehab counselor and a certified community work incentives benefits counselor. So thank you so much, Suzie, for joining us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you for joining me today to talk about how Social Security and SSI works. I wanted to give you an understanding of the benefits and then some hints that I've learned along the way that might help you through this process. So the last slide has my contact information for you, and I can answer any follow-up questions that you have. Although I have created a consulting business, there's no charge to any job candidates or families for my assistance. So I want you to feel free to, because I know what it's like trying to get information, for all the questions that we have as parents. Okay. So we're going to start out with the definition of disability, because I think that that's where our confusion always starts, is with how Social Security defines disability. And so I'm going to read it to you and then I'll break it down for you. So it's the inability to engage in any substantial gainful activity due to a mental or a medical physical impairment that's expected to last at least 12 months or result in death. So basically, when you break that down, when it talks about the inability to engage in any substantial gainful activity, that's what we call SGA. That literally means that the individual is not able to work and earn over SGA. Now, that SGA amount is set each year, and for 2024, the SGA level is $1,550 in gross earned wages in a month. So for the individual who meet the criteria for statutory blindness, which is a little bit different than just someone who might have night blindness or things like that, it's a certain criteria. That SGA level is going to go all the way up to $2,590 this year. So the next part of that disability, what that means is that not only are they looking at work, but they're also looking at the individual's disability. So it has to be due to a medical or a mental impairment that's determined by Social Security. And then the third part of this definition is that it has to last at least 12 months or result in death. So in other words, the disability is not temporary. So because they look at the not being able to work at substantial levels and at the actual disability, Social Security does do two different types of reviews on an individual. One's a work activity review, which is done when the individual works, and the other one is going to be a medical review. I think this gets confusing for people because they think the disability is permanent. It's not going to ever change. Why would Social Security do a review on me? So depending on the type of disability, they're going to review every disability on a 3, 5, or 7-year medical review cycle. That's looking at just the disability. Most individuals experiencing, say, a mental health disability, they're going to be reviewed every 3 years because medical recovery is expected. Well, it's cyclical. So it's not truly, expected, but that's the way Social Security defines it. But let's say an individual with Down syndrome, that individual is going to be reviewed every 7 years because medical recovery is unlikely. But even they get, it doesn't matter. Social Security will still do a medical review. So this definition is applied to both the Social Security disability insurance and to SSI. And there may be other eligibility criteria depending on what the individual is receiving. And we're mostly focused today on SSI, but I still wanted to kind of give you a comparison of the two disability benefits so that you have kind of an overall brief understanding. And I want to start with the one that's going to make the most sense to all of you, because if you became disabled today and you work, this would be the benefit you might possibly get a disability benefit from. It's called Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. So when we work, we pay a tax. It's called the Federal Insurance Contributions Act tax, or FICA tax. That's the money the federal government takes out of your check and sets it aside for you for your retirement. Does that make sense to everybody? This is a Title II benefit. We can collect that benefit at 62 if we want, at a 25% reduction, or we can wait till our full retirement age and have no reduction. So this benefit does come out of the Social Security Trust Fund. It's the one they always talk about that's going to run out. I don't really think it will, but that's the fear out there. It's like an insurance policy, because since you paid into it, you're entitled to it if you became disabled. The amount that you receive then is going to be based on how long you worked and how much money you made. It's called insurance because if you become disabled before your full retirement, then you draw off that work record as if you're already fully retired. If an individual is able to go back to work and earn income, then Social Security is going to count that money when it's earned. There are many work incentives that provide safety nets so that an individual doesn't just automatically lose the whole cash benefit. They can gradually transition off the benefit. With SSDI, there is a mandatory 5-month waiting period before receiving their first cash payment. And then after being on the benefits for 24 months, an individual would be covered by Medicare, just like when you're retired. There are some medical conditions, though, that are so significant that Social Security actually waives that 24-month wait, and Medicare starts immediate, like end-stage renal and ALS. So let's talk a little bit about SSI. So there's a lot of individuals who acquire their disability prior to the age of 18 or prior to the age of 22. This is what most students are going to qualify for at 18. If they do qualify for SSI prior to the age of 18, it's based on the individual student's disability as well as how they compare to their same age peers. But the big piece on that is that if you have a student that's qualifying for SSI prior to the age of 18, it's because they look at the whole family income, and the whole family income is very low. Okay, when they do turn 18, Social Security will do what they call a redetermination to see if they meet the adult criteria for SSI, because what happens is the criteria changes. Prior to the age of 18, they're looking at how do they compare in relation to their peers, same age peers. After age 18, they want to know if they can work. So it's a big definition difference. And families don't know it's coming. And so it's really important, if you're a professional out there and you have someone under 18 on SSI, you really want to make sure that they know when they get that paperwork. Don't throw it away because they're already on SSI. This is a new application that they need to do. So because these individuals have acquired their disability at birth or really early in life, they don't have a work history, right? And so they haven't earned enough quarters to qualify for a Title II or like that SSDI benefit. So the federal government is going to give them enough money for their shelter and food. So this amount is set each year. It's called the federal benefit rate. For 2024, that amount is $943. Now, I know you're all laughing because you're thinking, how does that pay for shelter and food? I don't know what to tell you. That's just the way it is. The funding for SSI does not come out of that Social Security Trust Fund. This money comes out of general treasury dollars. And in other words, this is a financially needy program for individuals with disabilities. So because of that, because it's for your shelter and food, if all you need is $943, and let's say your grandmother gives you $100 for your birthday, then now you don't need $943. Everything affects this benefit. Also, if someone else is providing all or some of your shelter and food, then Social Security is going to automatically reduce that SSI benefit by 1/3. If an individual does go to work and is receiving SSI, Social Security counts the money in the month that they receive it. The one good thing, really good thing about SSI is that the benefit starts right away as soon as they're qualified. And so does the Iowa health insurance, which is called Medicaid. So I wanted to show you the Social Security website because they've really done a lot to improve their online services. when you're looking at websites, this is a warning from me. You want to make sure that you're looking at websites that are, when you're applying for benefits or anything else related to Social Security information, you want to make sure it's an official socialsecurity.gov website. Otherwise, you're going to be getting old information or misinformation. We really want you to follow the guidance that Social Security gives you directly. But remember, Social Security does make mistakes, so you want to be prepared to appeal any and every negative decision within the prescribed timelines. Oftentimes, I think what individuals do is they will get a denial and they won't read the whole letter. They'll just give up. And you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you appeal that decision. And now they have it so that you can actually appeal online. So I'm going to take you to, and of course it opened over here. So like I said, they've really done a lot to improve this. There's a whole walkthrough, you know, all the different questions that you could possibly have. They have these answered on here. And then you can actually go ahead and you can learn how to apply. And it's going to tell you what you need. So let's say you're an adult, so you're 18 and older. You're doing this for your child, your adult child. You're going to apply for SSI, for disability. And then it's going to give you all the information that you need, and it'll actually take you right into their site where you can apply. So this is a really, really good way to do it. I think a lot of times we want somebody to help us or walk us through it, but I think as the parent, you really are the one that knows your child the best. And so I'd encourage you not to be afraid to do that. You can do it yourself. You really can. So the key here when you're applying for benefits is to focus on barriers to employment. Remember how I said it's work, but it's also making that if they're making, if they have a disability. So if they have the disability, like let's say they're already on the ID waiver or they have an intellectual disability, that's taken care of, you know, get that psych eval so that you have that ready. And then focus on barriers to employment. In other words, what are the things that make it difficult for this individual to work? That's going to be really important. A lot of times people will just send in lots and lots of medical information, but they don't send in any evidence that substantiates that individual's actual barriers to becoming and to staying employed. And so you want to get that evidence from teachers, from family members. Work experiences are great, and the schools are doing more and more of those. Especially you want to get that verification of barriers from the student's vocational rehabilitation counselor, because Social Security is going to put a lot of weight on the information that they get from vocational rehabilitation. So if you're not already signed up with their services and they're getting close to 18, you want to make sure that you get that done right away, because not absolutely positive, but the last thing I heard, Iowa has gone into an order selection wait list. So you might want to do it right away. I don't think it's a very long wait, maybe 6 months. So if you're planning also to go through the process of legal guardianship, now that process you can start at 17 and a half. It isn't necessary, but just know that Social Security is going to insist on talking to your student otherwise if they're over 18. Okay? Applying for SSI after they turn 18 is going to ensure that Social Security is not going to count the family's income and will then consider that family or that student to be a family of one. So I recommend, and I've talked to a lot of different Social Security people, and they say it's just cleaner if you wait till the month after they turn 18. So because SSI is supposed to be enough for their shelter and food, your student needs to be paying their fair share of the household expenses. Now, this isn't rent, so it's not considered to be rental income. It's like your roommate, all right? If the student's not paying their share, then Social Security is automatically going to reduce their SSI benefit by 1/3. And it happens a lot. And going back to the guardianship piece, now that Iowa has it so that you can apply at 17 and a half, you could get that all in place prior to age 18. But like I said, it's not necessary. I still have times where Lucy's 26, and I still have times where, you know, either Social Security or Medicaid or somebody will call and they want to talk to her. And I'm like, okay, good luck with that. She's nonverbal. But and I just recently had to go through a whole thing because when you change MCOs and, you know, there's always changes, went from fee for service DHS waiver to now they're called WellPoint, and nobody, even DHS, didn't make them have access to the guardianship papers, and so nobody would talk to me. It was really frustrating, but it happens. So I wanted to talk a little bit about hiring a lawyer because that's the big question everybody wants. Just go hire a lawyer. So when my dad died, my mother had died prior to him. He had a book. Open up the book and it says, you do not need to hire a lawyer. If you do, hire them by the hour. He didn't like lawyers, and he was a lawyer. So that made it even funnier that he really didn't want you to have to spend extra money. And so I don't want you to have to spend extra money. What I've learned is you do not need a lawyer to apply for benefits. Seriously. Most people, they give up too soon on everything related to disability benefits, including the waiver services. You need to always keep appealing any decision that you get that's negative. Even if you think that maybe that's right, I would appeal the decisions as far as you can. You are your child's champion, so don't give up. If you don't appeal within the timeframes, then you're going to have to start all over with Social Security. So I've seen it take someone who consistently appealed every decision, and still it took 7 years. And this was an individual who had a really high right leg amputation and had cerebral palsy. And it took 7 years of appeals before it was approved. It went all the way to the level of and that's what I'm going to tell you is that what I learned is that if you get to the level of appeal where you have an appearance before an administrative law judge, then that's when you're going to hire a lawyer. Okay, that would probably mean that that's been at least appealed and had negative decisions for about 5 years. So I told you it would be short because I want to make sure that we have a lot of time to really be able to get your questions answered. Here's my contact information.
Could an 18-year-old qualify if she's in college and doing well in college?
Again, they're looking at, do they have the medical or mental condition that would qualify? There's a thing called the Blue Book. So depending on what the disability is, but then they're also going to look at, do they have barriers to employment? And the person that I told you about that it took 7 years was actually in college to get their degree in software engineering. And so they finally qualified after 7 years. So yeah, I mean, I think if you have significant barriers to employment, definitely, because those aren't going to go away just because you're in college.
The IVRS has a 6-month waiting list, which I think is what you had indicated hearing as well. And I think it matches what we've heard as well. Does that impact applying for SSI? Do we need to wait for IVRS to approve the application and get services?
I think it will depend on, I'd go ahead and apply for SSI because it's going to take them a while. Social Security is pretty backed up. And in 6 months, you might get a decision from Social Security. And by that time, they'll be enrolled. They'll be starting with voc rehab. But, it kind of depends on what your disability is. And I'm going to self-disclose where I'm Lucy's guardian, so I guess she doesn't care, that she has Down syndrome, and she was born with a lot of different, as happens with Down syndrome, different medical conditions as well. But she also has a 25 IQ, so she's on the ID waiver. I tell people how I describe her is if there was a fire in the house, she wouldn't know enough to get up and leave. That said, so it was pretty simple to apply for SSI for her. I took her with me, and literally all I took was her latest psychological evaluation that I had to get for her waiver review. And it was 2 pages. So it was really simple, but it's going to be different for everybody.
Please share more about appealing a denial. Does an appeal often lead to gaining SSI benefits? Most of my families receive a denial because they are over income. Would you recommend families appeal to this? So this is obviously a service provider.
Okay, so if they're applying for a person that's under the age of 18, they're going to count all that family's income and resources. And most students in the state of Iowa are going to be denied. I mean, most of people make too much money because we're talking about if they qualify under the age of 18, it's because the family is very, very poor. They're very financially needy. They have to have resources, like countable resources. They have to have less than $2,000 in the bank for that student, $2,000 if it's one parent, $3,000 if it's two parents. So total of $5,000 altogether, $5,000. And then they count the vehicles towards that resource limit too. And they count 401ks and all those things. So there aren't a lot of parents. Well, there are still a lot of parents that do qualify under the age of 18, but most parents are going to get denied because of income. Now, once they're 18, they're looking at them as a household of one. So they're only looking at that student. But a lot of times I've seen parents will start one of those, not sure what the name of it is, is it 529? It's the college fund. They'll start a
Correct.
college fund for their
Yeah,
student.
a 529.
Yes, and then they'll get to a point where they're like, okay, they're not going to college. So then they've got that money sitting in there and they need to move it to an ABLE, or they need to take the money out. They need to do something with it because it'll count towards that resource limit.
Okay, thank you. And
Life
just
insurance policies too, like cash out life insurance, they'll look at those too.
you mentioned a blue book, and somebody had asked where would we find that blue book that you referenced?
Well, it would be on the Social Security website. It's just a list of all the different impairments. And I think it's fairly comprehensive. I wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to determine it. I would just focus on those barriers to employment. That's why those work experiences when they're in school are so powerful.
Who can I talk to about ideas on how to keep my own son's resources down? Tips I can use, real world advice on what other guardians do and how to help him budget. He does pay me rent. We agreed on an amount that is acceptable and fair with SSA.
Yeah, so I would say, okay, so it's a snapshot. They're looking at the last day of the month. And if your account is, their accounts are over 2,000, you need to get it below for the first day of the month. That's the snapshot. So, with 943, and if they're paying their share of the household expenses, they're not going to have a lot of extra money. I mean, they probably won't. And they should be paying for all the different things. We forget that, oh, well, I just faxed in all this stuff to Meridian, and all the faxing cost me, $4.99. I should take that out of Lucy's account, right? Any of those things that you provide. Another thing, if you're doing guardianship, and guardianship has gotten way more expensive in Iowa since they changed the laws. But when we were leaving the judge's chamber, he said, oh, by the way, you can take the cost of her of this court stuff. You can take that out of her SSI. And I went, whoa, okay, well, that would take several months, but yeah. And you can, once you get it so that Social Security is recognizing that fair share amount, if you have to add it, increase it over time, like we have, Lucy has 6 older brothers. So as they all left, her fair share increased. Now that my husband is retired and getting Social Security benefits, her benefit amount went up. So she draws off of his work history now. That's kind of a kind of a component of the whole family benefit that you get. Once a parent is either deceased, disabled, or retired, and that person got their disability before the age of 22, they start to draw off of that parent work record. It's different. The rules are all different, but the dollar amount is higher. So that's one of the things that makes it a little more difficult, because now Lucy doesn't get $943. She gets like almost $1,400 a month. Little more difficult. Like, if I don't go to get the money out for her share of the household expenses and all the other little streaming things that she has, I have to look on that last day or a couple of days before to see where she's at. And then she has a real fondness, love, basically, for sushi. And, sushi's not cheap. And so obviously that's what we have to do, is go out for sushi, which she loves, or even order it online. That's the way that I take care of it. When you're the parent and they live with you, Social Security isn't as, and you're the representative payee, they're not as stringent. I was just talking to a lawyer friend that works for public guardianship. She's over at the Department or Health and Human Services now, and Jennifer Donovan. And she was like, yeah, I'm fine with people just throwing the receipts into a drawer. And then if you do get audited, you just pull it out and figure it out, because they're not really looking at it that closely. So when you're first applying for it, you want to look at your mortgage, and your mortgage without property tax, and your household insurance, because you think about it in terms of, this person is my roommate, right? Not my renter, they're my roommate. And so if I took the mortgage, just the pure mortgage and interest, and I divided by however many people live in the house, and then I divide, the water bill, the gas, electric, all those things, then they pay me, right? That amount, based on what the household expenses are. I have seen people run into problems if they made it too high. Some people might have very high household expenses, and 943 is an SSI check. So let's say that you live in a home that's like $1 million home, and your mortgage is $4,000 a month, and their share is $1,000. Well, Social Security isn't going to allow that. And it doesn't make sense to me that they do this, but I've seen them do it. So basically, they'll go ahead and reduce that person's check by 1/3. So you want to be reasonable with it. And I've seen parents go in and just say to Social Security, what we would charge anyone else living in that room is $600 a month. And that's how much we would charge to have somebody else. That would be the amount of the expenses of that room. You don't want to really call it rent. People get real weird when you call it rent. You just want to call it the fair share, like their roommate. Okay. I kind of have a little list in my phone notes that lists out all the different things that I know that I monthly pay for her. And that way I can just take it all out of her account, and transfer it. And if anyone asks, it's like, obviously we're spending a lot more on her than what she actually, even at the higher amount now, it's still higher. It's still more than what, I mean, her supplements alone are outrageously expensive if you guys do anything like that. I've never had anybody ever go into the weeds with it. Honestly, don't think that Social Security has the capacity to go in the weeds with it.
If an individual would transition from living in the family to a group home, and how does the monthly amount change in that type of situation?
So then all of the money would go to whatever the expenses are in the group home, basically. They would get a certain amount. They would have a representative payee. That could be the parent, I guess, still. I don't know a whole lot about how that works. But I know that they would have to be upfront with you about what they're going to have to pay for their rent, because a group home isn't like if they went to a intermediate care facility, which in that case, I think they only allow them to have $50 out of their Social Security. But in a group home setting, it's more like they're roommates in an apartment or a house.
Is there somewhere you can look to see how payments should be made?
You mean to the parent as far as the shelter and food, they call it in-kind maintenance and support. That's what Social Security calls it. So if you're talking about their fair share, it can be made any way. For the longest time, somebody at Social Security convinced us to get that Direct Express card, that green card. So all the money was deposited on there. That was a big mistake. I should have opened her a bank account, because it's so hard to get the money. And every time I would find a bank, they would charge me $1.50 to get the money out. That I'd have to get cash, and then I'd have to, put it in my own account, pay her share of expenses. I'm just recently changed and created her an account. She's 26 now, because it was getting even harder to find a bank. Although I did recently find out that Wells Fargo will actually let me do it, and they don't charge a fee, which I didn't know that as long as I go in. But yeah, I mean, you're just transferring the money into it. So like, let's say in my case, I have a Wells Fargo account. I have opened her a bank account now. So next month, her January benefit will be deposited on February 3rd into this new bank account, hopefully. And then I will just, because it's all hooked together, I'll just be able to do a transfer into my account of her money. And I could just put a memo in, and there you go. You've got your little memo that tells you what the money was for. So in other words, a record. Otherwise, you're dealing with cash. You should be able to go online. Now, if you are the representative payee for your student, when you create an account for yourself, if you haven't done this, I would recommend everybody on here to create an SSA.gov account for themselves. And if you're also the representative payee, when you go into your account, it's going to give you two choices for services. It's going to say My Social Security, or it's going to say Representative Payee Services, and you can click on one or the other. They only started that in 2020 right during COVID. I was looking at my account and I went, whoa, that's really cool. So you go in there, and then it's all of Lucy's information is in there. I can print out a benefit letter once she goes to work. I can actually report wages once they register her employer. You can report their wages that way. It's just very, very great way to do it. You can order them another Medicare card if they're on Medicare. There's just a lot of plus it's good for you as an individual to have an SSA.gov account, so that you can look and make sure that they've recorded your wages over the years accurately, because someday you might want to retire. Yes. Well, if you're their payee, if you're their payee, you're setting it up for yourself, and their information is there. Now, if they are if they're going to be their own payee and they don't have a guardian, then they'll have to set up their own. And I think that's the hard thing right now for parents, is that when the rules changed, a lot of lawyers were like, oh, just do a power of attorney. Well, we're talking about an individual who might not be competent or be able to understand well enough to even be able to sign off on a power of attorney, which is interesting that lawyers would encourage that, because you have to be competent. Just like our parents, as they're aging, and they sign over a power of attorney. Well, they sign that over when they're still competent, so that when they aren't competent down the road, they already have it in place. So you want to really think about, is your person able to have the discernment to make decisions? And you can talk to lawyers about that. In fact, when you do apply for guardianship for an individual, you're petitioning the court to become their guardian. The court is actually going to assign them someone to represent them to make sure that it's appropriate. So it's just really important that they be protected.
How soon you should apply for disability after becoming physically or mentally, medically impaired?
I would say, so we're talking maybe about somebody that's already over the age of 18 and they become disabled. It depends on if they're still working. If they still have income from work, I get that question all the time. You know, I've got a disability, I have MS, I still work, but I'm getting to the point where I think I'm going to need to stop working. Well, they had, remember the definition said the inability to engage in any substantial gainful activity. That SGA level this year is $1,550. So if you apply for a disability, Social Security disability insurance or SSI benefit, and you're earning over $1,550 a month, they're going to automatically deny that because your income is too high. You've already demonstrated that you can earn that much. Okay, so this person's already 18. If they have a legal guardian and it is that grandparent, they're not going to count any of their resources. They're not even going to, even the parents' income or resources, they don't count. If they're over 18, they only looking at them as a household of one. Does that make sense? Did I say there? Okay. Yeah, because if they're over 18, they're one person. Doesn't matter how much the people that they live with, how much money they have, they're looking at their income and their resources. Things they count as a resource would be like, they don't count the house they live in that they own, but if they had a second home, they'd count that. They also exclude one car. They exclude funds in an IABLE account, funds in a past plan, burial plots. They exclude those. They will count cash out life insurance policy, money in the bank, money in your mattress, your bank account. You know, if you have $10,000 worth of baseball cards in your closet, they would count those as a resource. Tools, if the person's using them, you know, because people that are mechanics, they have a lot of tools worth a lot of money. If they're actively working, SSI will exclude the tools. It's a work incentive called property essential to self-support. But if the person has all these tools and they're not working, then they could count that as a resource and they could lose their SSI until they reduce the resources. Yeah, I just looked that up and it's like $25,000 that the person would have to be getting from Social Security before they would have to pay taxes on it. Not necessarily. I mean, I created a fair share agreement because people were passing around this rental agreement and I didn't want them to call it rent because it's really not. Because then if you call it rent, then the parents think that they have to claim it as rental income and it's not, your roommates. And so I created kind of a fair share agreement that you could have them sign. You could get that from your vocational rehabilitation counselor.
If you have SSI or an individual that gets SSI that lives with you and you move to a different state, is that also the case for SSI?
No, that's a federal program. SSI and SSDI and Medicare, those are all federal, and you don't have to reapply for those if you move.
When a person starts drawing off of a parent who is deceased, disabled, or retired, do they get a combination of SSI and SSDI, or does it become SSDI?
That's going to depend on the parent's work record. So if the parent is just retired, then the disabled adult child is what they call them. They get about half of the benefit amount that the parent gets based on the parent's full retirement. If if the parent is deceased, it's 75% of what the parent's full retirement would be. The amount that it's going to be, it really is going to depend. Now, let's say the parent, their benefit amount isn't very much. Okay. And so let's say the parent's amount is $1,000. So that student is only going to get $500. $500 doesn't fit the federal benefit rate of $943. And so that person's benefit is going to be supplemented with SSI. So they'll get both SSI at the beginning of the month, and then they'll also get that SSDI benefit on either the third day of the month or sometime toward the end of the month. It's just really depends on the benefit amount.
When the child who is receiving SSI is paying their fair share, can that check be written to the mortgage company directly, or should it be going to the parent?
The parent, they're not part of the mortgage. They shouldn't be part of the mortgage.
I didn't want to misspeak.
But I have seen, and I did have a parent, a single parent with an adult daughter with a significant disability, and they actually purchased the home together. So they were literally roommates and both were on the mortgage. But normally that wouldn't be the case, because they can exclude the cost of one house that they own, that they live in, that won't be counted toward their resource limit. So, and if they're on an SSDI benefit, once they get to the point where the parent is, like I said, deceased, disabled, or retired, they're drawing off of a Title II benefit typically. A Title II benefit or retirement benefit, most of us are familiar with, there are no resource limits. You know, as a retired person, you can have as many houses, cars, and boats, money in the bank, retirement funds, that it doesn't count. It's an entitlement. It's a benefit you're getting because you paid into the system and now you're drawing it out. And it also has these auxiliaries that go along with it: widows, survivors benefits, disabled adult children benefit. So those are all like additional protections that are under that qualified worker.